Optimized here, optimized here, optimized here, optimized, Last year I made 30 videos and I got many things wrong in those videos. So let's try to fix that, starting from the very beginning with my first 3 videos. There will also be timestamps for people who want to skip around to the more recent content. The first 3 videos on my channel are me arguing that Goku's soul is all of fiction. I don't actually think Goku's soul is all of fiction. These videos were me just practicing debating. Watching these videos back, I realized how much I did not know and how bad I was at debating. So I'm gonna just move on.
Honestly, man, I'm gonna concede. You won.
For curious people, I will debunk the argument I used later in the video. Most of the things I said in this video are valid, but it's a lowball in modern Dragon Ball scaling. The trend right now for Dragon Ball scaling is low complex to outer. This might sound crazy to the average person, but these arguments are starting to gain traction in the Dragon Ball community. I'm not going to comment on them right now as I'm going to need more time to think them over. But if you are interested in the arguments, head over to a channel like Drip Sauce or Mr. Crafty, where they go over the arguments. With all that being said, so I made a video about scaling a dating sim. This sounds dumb, but the video actually ended up being really fun. The dating sim is centered around eldritch deities, so it was kind of bound to have some good scaling. In the video I said that space-time is 4D. Now this seems to be the case as most people just Google is space-time 4D and get the answer that says yes. The thing is, space-time is a lot more complicated. The most common justification for space-time being 4D is that you have to know the time to meet up with an individual in space. This does not prove that time is the 4th spatial dimension. It just proves that there is a temporal dimension that interacts with 3 other spatial dimensions. If you look more deeply into this, you'll find that in physics this is actually a debated topic. Actual 4th dimensional time is called Minkowski space. This theory makes time into an actual 4th spatial dimension, but the dimension works slightly differently. I'm still very confused about how all of this works, so if anyone understands this stuff, please contact me on Discord or in the comments. Another thing I said is that the gap between 4 and 5D is infinite. This is incorrect. Funnily enough, the person I recommended you go watch to look into dimensional theory, Surfbone, disagrees with that sentiment, and I'll just let his video explain it.
No height or 0 height, so even an infinite amount of squares stacked on top of each other still wouldn't make a cube.
Another thing I said in this video is that this verse sells Dragon Ball. And as I stated before, Dragon Ball scaling has been buffed in the community lately, so I don't know if I agree with that statement anymore. With that being said, let's go on to... I made a video on whether or not the Dragon Ball universe was infinite. In that video I came to the conclusion that the Dragon Ball universe was finite, and I completely disagree with that now. So the first thing I do is flash up an image of a curved universe, implying that a curved universe makes it finite. For people who don't know, a curved universe is a 3-dimensional universe that has a 4-dimensional curve. For example, a sphere has a 2-dimensional surface. Imagine that our universe is the surface of a hypothetical 4-dimensional sphere called a hypersphere. The first issue with this is that the image I flashed up was just a demonstration from Whis, and he was not commenting on the geometry of the universe. The second thing is that a curved universe does not make it finite. There could hypothetically be an infinite size sphere, so the same applies to the hypersphere. A closed space can be infinite. This flows right into the next point. In the video I bring up that Bulma says there is an edge to an infinite universe, so it can't be infinite. Once again, there are 2 issues with this. First of all, Bulma could be referring to the edge of the observable universe, or she could be wrong as she has a human perspective on the cosmology of the universe. The second issue is that just because it has an edge does not make it finite. There are many examples of edges to an infinite space in fiction. For example, the source wall from DC. For people who still don't think there can be an edge to an infinite space, imagine an infinite distance between you and an object. Now draw a line between you and the object. You would be on the edge of the line between you and the object, and the object would be on the other end of that line. This means it's possible to have an infinite distance between 2 points, which would mean there can be an edge to an infinite universe. Future Optimized here. I'm going to cut in right now and say that I'm on the fence about this topic. Infinities are very iffy, and I just don't know what to say about them anymore. Because yes, while that would be considered an edge, you could hypothetically subtract 1 from that edge, and it would still be infinite and fall under the definition. You could also add 1, and it would fall under the definition. You could also add another set of infinity, and it would fall under the definition. So I don't know anymore. I'm just going to throw that out there. My other point still stands though, so yeah. The next argument I make is that the visual display of the distance between Namek and Earth is half of the universe, and Ballllld calculated the time it would take to get there. The problem with this is that the model is inconsistent. It took Vegeta and Nappa's space pods a year to get there, yet a couple of days to get to Namek, which makes no sense with Namek literally being half the universe. Even if this was somehow true, their spaceships could have infinite speed, but it just takes them that long to travel an infinite distance. The last thing I bring up in the video is the idea that Dragon Ball commonly uses words like infinite and limitless in a hyperbolic sense. The thing is, most of these statements are from cocky villains, while the infinite universe statement is from the Daizenshu. The Daizenshu is a much more reliable source than Buu saying he's omnipotent. That's why I currently think the Dragon Ball universe is infinite. But before we go on to the next video, if you made it this far, consider liking the video. It will tell YouTube you like this content, and it will help me out too. With that being said, let's move on to... This video is a bunch of speed scales for Goku. The one that had the biggest flaw was my irrelevant speed argument. I argued that Goku would have irrelevant speed because the world of Void has no dimensionality. If you know anything about irrelevant speed, that is not how it works. To have irrelevant speed, you need to be above time and space as a whole to transcend both aspects of the speed equation. I knew this at the time, and this was more of a rat argument for the sake of starting arguments in the comments section, which I can say worked. There were also other flaws with my arguments, but I made a video going more in depth into Goku's speed. So if you're interested, there should be an info card in the top right corner of your screen, so you can click on that if you want to watch it. Saitama versus Goku is a question that is debated a lot to this day, so I made a video on it. The thing is, it's really outdated as it was before Saitama versus Garou, but even within that time frame, it got things wrong. The first thing I said was that Saitama is not a gag character. I'm currently on the fence on whether Saitama is a gag character or not, but my take on gag character scaling still applies. The second thing that I said was that Saitama would be below the speed of light. This is blatantly wrong with the scale I gave. He would be 100,000 meters per second faster than the speed of light. You know, just a slight mix-up. This is another joke video. In that video, I argue Mojang could not stop Herobrine. And Mojang is a real-life organization, so Herobrine would scale above fiction. Also, I know it's pronounced Mojang, but Mojang sounds better. Now, the way I phrase this argument sounds dumb, but surprisingly, a lot of people argue things similar to this. People will argue things like the one above all is the actual writer, so he scales above all of fiction. The major issue with this is that authors do not have authority over real life. So authors who write fictional characters into real life, or real life people into fiction, require a higher level of authority or burden of proof to do so. This would mean that arguments around authors' statements like Mojang not being able to stop Herobrine are an appeal to a false authority. This is more commonly known in the power scaling community as the reality interaction fallacy. But in actual fallacy terms, it's an appeal to a false authority, as authors do not have narrative control over reality. With all of that said, we move on to possibly the worst video I've made. This video is bad, simply put. This is mainly because I did not know anything about SCP scaling, and to be honest, I still don't. SCPs are some of the hardest things to scale, and that's why I've procrastinated on doing any more. With the excuses out of the way, let's dive in. So I call the SCP-3143 weak. Anyone who knows SCP scaling would say 3143 is probably in the top 100 strongest SCPs. 3143 can equalize the playing field with higher realities. He can collapse higher fictional narratives to an equal point. This makes him absurdly broken, and I called him the third weakest. Yeah, I'm intelligent. But this is only the beginning. One other thing I said a lot in this video was that the gap between dimensions is infinite, which once again is not true. Infinity times 0 is not a finite number. I also said that something fictional is on a lower dimension, which is not true. There are infinite dimensional beings in fiction. We are superior to them, but we are only 3D. This is because we view them as fiction. Their reality is simply lower than ours. We can manipulate their reality, but they can't manipulate ours. But now we go on to probably the worst thing I said. I mentioned 2747. 2747 is probably within the top 10 strongest SCPs. Now, not to insult myself too much, I said that 2747 was strong, but simply mentioning it in a video of that nature is pretty stupid. In this video, I heavily imply that this would have some sort of scaling. The issue is that this universe is just a universe where things are dead. This does not mean that SCP-682 actually died. But if you wanted to steelman the idea that things are happening beforehand and something killed everything, this also does not mean that it scales to 682, because this could just be a weaker version of 682. There are simply too many unknowns for this universe to actually scale anywhere. So I made a video on Jiren versus Broly. With the information we had at the time, I still think this video is good, but now that Superhero has come out, it kinda throws a wrench into the scaling, with Broly being implied to be above Ultra Instinct Goku. I have not looked too much into the scaling for Superhero, so I'm just gonna leave it at that and save it for potentially another video. This also applies to my Gogeta vs Goku video, as it's based on my Jiren vs Broly video. Goku vs 3812. Yeah, this is definitely peak content. Nah, but for real though, this is another troll video where I argue Goku beats SCP-3812, one of the strongest SCPs. But as I promised earlier in the video, I will debunk it. So my argument is that Goku existed in the world of Void. The world of Void is a place of nothingness, and logic is the thing. So Goku would be existing outside of the bounds of logic. The implications of this are that Goku's scaling would be beyond logic, so he would be omnipotent, and arguably even above omnipotence. Now, I'm not the one who made this argument, and I'm just gonna hand it to the person who made it to debunk it.
So this one is a pretty easy debunk. You could debunk in like one sentence. You basically say, well, if the world of Void has nothing, that means it has no logic, right? Therefore, I can't use logic to justify Goku being beyond all concepts. Right.
Now, there are other ways to argue around this besides his debunking. It's just a lot harder to argue. You could argue that it means nothing in the sense that there is nothing in this room. If you were to say that against this man, he would probably just argue that it means literal nothingness based on the context of the statement. I legit saw this man beat hundreds of people in debates with this argument. By the way, this is the man who first got me into scaling in the first place, so go sub to Cole the Skull. He does movie reviews on his channel, but is currently taking a break. It would be cool if he got back and had a lot more subscribers than before, so subscribe or else. Speaking of the last argument, let's talk about omnipotence. I made a video on omnipotence in fiction. In that video, I come to the conclusion that omnipotence can exist, but the burden of proof is incredibly high. The problem with that video is you can simply argue that if omnipotence is above logic, then why am I using logic to make a statement about it? If something is beyond logic, then it's beyond truth values. Asking if something beyond truth values can exist is like asking what color is something that's colorless. Another thing is that my argument relies on the idea that you can go above logic in the first place. So if you were to prove that you can't go above logic, then my argument would have a major flaw. So this is short, but I don't actually know anything about God of War scaling, and this post was a joke. Being transcendent over space-time would make you 4 to 5D. I'm not saying that Kratos or God of War scaling is not outer, but just that that statement would not be enough for outerversal. So the last video I'm covering is my Platonic concept video. Now the first thing I did wrong was not going directly to Plato's writings. I did this because I heard they were cancer to read, and his dialogues alone are 100,000 words long. So simply put, I was lazy. With that said, I did read papers where people summed up Platonism. The paper was written by Mark Ballllld, who has a PhD in philosophy. This does not mean I'm in the right, but I did not go in completely blind. Now the second thing is that in the video, I concluded that Platonic concepts are outer under character stats and profiles. My reasoning was that Platonism would be above dimensionality as a whole. I do not agree with my argument now. This does not mean I think Platonic concepts are not outer, I just disagree with the justification I gave. In that video, I come to the conclusion that Platonic concepts are superior to dimensionality because they are transcendent over reality and are non-spatial. The thing is, you can be transcendent over reality and non-spatial without being outer. For example, let's say a character is transcendent over reality and is spatial. Space-time is usually 3 to 4D. This would mean that transcending it would make a character 4D to 5D. Now let's say a character that's non-spatial fights them and has equal power. This non-spatial character would have a level of power that transcends reality. Their power would be equivalent to 4 to 5D, but would not actually be 4 to 5D as they are non-spatial. All this requires is a system of scaling power that does not have dimensions but can be compared to dimensions, kind of like this. 1n in this example would be equal to 1D power, and 2n would be equal to 2D and so on. This would allow for being transcendental to reality without being spatial. So this would mean at the bare minimum, Platonic concepts would scale above the base verse of whatever series you are scaling. Now, do I currently think Platonism is outer? Well, I'm on the fence. I simply do not know enough about Plato's views to say so. If you have read Plato's writings, hit me up on Discord. It would help me out to not have to read 100,000 words. Nah, but for real though, if you disagree with something I say or have something to add to the conversation, hit me up on Discord. It should be on the screen now. You can also write a comment. Just remember to keep it civil. I might eventually redo the Platonic concept video and address more arguments for and against it. And if I do that, don't worry, I will read directly from Plato for that video. So you made it to the end of the video. Because you made it this far, you might like my channel in general, so consider subscribing. It It would help me out by getting me one step closer to 1,000 subs, which I'm trying to get by the end of the year. It'll also help you out as YouTube will push you more content to your liking. Also, while you're here, you might like my video where I go over how fast Goku is. With all that being said, this was Optimized, and I'll see you next time.